I can say without exaggeration that Insomniac's Spider-Man 2 was one of the most talked about games we have had in years. But does the game live up to the hype? Well, that depends on who you ask. As a sequel, Insomniac made sure to not take risks keeping the formula the same. For some, that's enough to call the game great. When I think about a masterpiece, I think of a game pushing the limits of what we thought was possible. Did Insomniac play it too safe with Spider-Man 2? Let's first start with the biggest change from the first game: 2 playable Spider-Men. In the previous games, there were only one main character. One of my biggest questions going into the game was, how is this going to work? Do I get to choose to use whoever I want at any point? The simple answer is no. Both characters coexist in the world together. There are some open world activities where you can choose either character to complete the mission. This is marked by having both spider faces in the FNSM app. I'll talk more about the open world later on, but for the majority of the game, a specific character is chosen for you. Do I think this was a good decision? Yeah, I do. It allows Insomniac to create specific missions that cater to an individual character. That's great for character development. Now you're still able to seamlessly swap between characters and fight random crime in the city with either one, but for any mission or activity that helps build the world around you, must play as that specific character. It helps give each spider more individuality. This is also shown with their own suits and skill trees, but I'll go in more detail on that later. Besides the 2 Spider-Men, there are other playable characters as well. Now this isn't a new idea. In the first game, both Miles and MJ were playable characters for a few missions. Miles was used to show perspective on events happening while letting the player feel more involved than cutscenes. MJ, well, we'll talk about MJ here in a little bit. I got some things to say on that. Spider-Man 2 chose the same formula, allowing to let us play 3 different characters outside of the 2 main Spider-Men. Haley Cooper only got 1 playable side mission. This was a huge waste of opportunity for me. I think Haley deserved better. Choosing to be a flashback mission explaining what happened was a waste of time more than anything. The awkward spray paint minigame is as boring as they come. It's unfortunate because replacing the audio with visual cues and showing the player how it would feel to be deaf is eye-opening and transcends video games. But the mission was so boring I couldn't wait for it to be over. Venom is also a playable character for 1 short mission later in the game. I'll talk about that more in the story section as it pertains more to that, but let's just say that was a blast. But as for MJ, I tried not to complain about stuff too much. I try to look at the glass half full. But why are we playing as MJ taking down a hunter base? It's a mockery. These hunters are supposed to be tough mercenaries. If these tasers are so strong where a random person with little combat training can take out hunters no problem, why aren't we giving these to every person? Every person should have a super taser. It completely negates any threat the hunters are. They are supposed to be some of the deadliest hunters in the world. And don't even get me started on her being able to take out the symbiotes. She can take out the symbiotes with 2 taser shots. I mean, at this point, Ubisoft needs to make her the next Assassin's Creed protagonist. The whole good thing I've done some training in Symkarian forces is a horrible excuse. I don't know one person that picks up Spider-Man 2 and wants to play as an untrained reporter. If Insomniac is going to give us missions to play as non-superhero characters, then just don't make the missions combat. Now most people can agree on not wanting to play as MJ or other non-superheroes, but the new traversal features in Spider-Man 2 are a lot more controversial. I don't want to spend time talking about the base traversal too much since it's generally the same as the first 2 games respectively for each character. Old Spider-Men have their unique flair and style. Insomniac didn't want to change up an already working formula for good reason. I always say if it's not broke, don't fix it. But Insomniac did choose to expand on the traversal system because of the larger map size, but I will go into detail about that later on. The new features are the super slingshot, air vents, and the web wings. The slingshot is simple. You now get the ability to, as it says, slingshot yourself to gain speed. For me, this feature makes sense because it's simple physics. It doesn't require anything out of the ordinary. We use our webs to propel our character faster and help start our swing with speed. The other 2 new features I have some problems with. Now the air vents are only in the game because of the new web wings. I don't have a problem with the web wings themselves, but I do have a problem with how they are included in the game. The web wings don't make sense. The web wings, in essence, allow you to fly for long periods of time by gliding around the map. Initially, I was under the impression that web wings were not meant to be the primary form of traversal, but a way to gain speed from a short-term boost. But from my time playing the game, the wings are encouraged to be used even more than the wind tunnels. That's shown by the air vents. The air vents allow you to get more air, which then allows you to glide for longer and higher. That obviously is the opposite of promoting web swinging. That promotes players using the new web wings even more. For characters like Spider-Man who are acrobatic, it's boring to watch them glide around the map. Now don't get me wrong, I don't think the web wings were an all-around bad idea. They are just poorly implemented. In my perfect idea of web wings, they would be used to gain boost in short spans, help navigate small areas lower to the ground, then swing would be hard to get around. Occasionally, they are fun to use, but I wish they were not given as much power as we got. Fast travel is also back in this game, and it may be the best version of fast travel I have ever seen. You don't get it right away, you do have to complete the second progress in each individual district to get the ability to fast travel to that district, but once you get the fast travel, you are able to load into the exact spot you choose, already swinging. This allows you to go anywhere on the map within seconds, which is a huge quality of life feature. I'm sure the new features for the Traversal were thought out because of the larger map size. With the addition of 2 new boroughs of New York, the map is almost double in size. But although the map is double in size, I was disappointed with the amount of content outside of the main story. The side content is split into 2 sections. You have side missions, which are story-based missions outside of the main story that track different characters in the city. Then you have side activities, which are activities created to fill the world with collectibles and challenges. For a game with 2 characters, I expected there to be more content than the previous game. That was not the case. There is almost the same amount of side content as there was in the 2018 game. And don't get me wrong, I prefer more meaningful content and less bloating, but the lack of content is noticeable, especially the side missions. Insomniac took little risk when it came to creating storylines for the side missions. Both the museum missions and Brooklyn Visions missions for Miles are bland. Not only are they quick, but there is no real payoff in them. The school missions, I'm helping students, but there's no motivation for them. The flame missions, while better, are a way to cameo the sequel by introducing Cletus Cassidy, who, spoilers if you didn't know, will be Carnage in the next game. I would have liked to see more flame missions rather than only 4. Seeing that it's going to set up the next game, we could have spent more time in that story arc. The app request has 2 of the most personal missions in the whole game. The mission with Howard and finding Grandpa are both personal, heartfelt missions, but like I said, there are only 2 of them. I would have liked there to be more missions of that nature in the game. On top of the side missions, you have 5 different side activities and 4 different collectibles. Some of them are very similar to the 2018 game, but just reskinned. The Mysteriums, for instance, are similar to the Taskmaster challenges from the first game, but instead of Taskmaster, we get Mysterio. My only gripe for these challenges is that I can only complete them as Miles. I'm not against making the Mysterio challenges for Miles only if there are Peter only challenges in the city as well, but there are no other combat challenges like these for Peter. Besides the Mysteriums, the other collectibles are Spider-Bots, Marco's Memories, and Photo Ops. I found them to be a lot more streamlined than the first game, so I will give Insomniac the props for stripping back the number of collectibles around the map. Small amounts of collectibles are fine, but I never want to spend hours swinging around and holding triangle or taking pictures. For the activities, we have 2 different bases to destroy, the Symbiote Nest and the Hunter bases. These side activities are like the hideouts from the 2018 game. I would have liked to see Insomniac think outside the box and develop a newer and unique system to the hideouts. But instead, you show up, take out the enemies, and that's about it. No real thought behind it. The other 3 activity types are non-combat. Honestly, these neither make nor break the game for me. If they weren't in the game, I wouldn't miss them, but I also don't hate doing them. Since they are non-combat, they are puzzle-based, which I do like puzzles. Granted, the puzzles could be done better, but it gets the job done. Random crimes are also back in Spider-Man 2. Unfortunately, they are almost exactly like the first game. Sure, they are fun the first few times, but after a while, I get bored of repeating the same crimes over and over again. If the amount of side content is going to stay this size for future installments, then I want there to be a way more amounts of random crime activities so that I don't get bored after a few times, especially for a game that is built around combat. Unfortunately, I found the combat system in Spider-Man 2 very safe and familiar. The combat system is still fun, don't get me wrong, but I found they did very little to elevate the combat over the first two entries. Uppercuts, finishers, air combos, and gadgets are all used the same with minor changes, even down to the animations. The only real changes come with the new parry system and a new way to use abilities. The new way to use abilities, holding L1 and a face button, is a streamlined way to use each Spidey's abilities. The problem I have with the bar of abilities with cooldowns is that I end up waiting for my ability cooldowns instead of using other types of combat. It makes my combat experience more one-dimensional. Instead of using the ability strategically, I use whatever one is off cooldown. For a game that has good bare bones of what combat should look like, I expected a larger leap than what we got. The only real change is the parry system. The parry system is an addition to the existing combat system. Now, I'm not necessarily against the parry system, but I'm not sure it's needed for Spider-Man since they can dodge or web up the enemy. My problem is being forced to use the parry. It's forced upon the player since there are new enemy types that need to be parried to be able to damage. It takes away freedom of choice in the way I approach combat. It's annoying enough to knock up baton enemies as if Spidey can't punch through a baton. But now, adding another mechanic I need to use slows the pace of combat down. But even then, I can get past that. I understand, it's a part of the game, it's a new feature, they want it to be used. But could the parry system be any more inconsistent? To parry in Spider-Man 2, you simply need to push the L1 button in the right parry window. The problem I found is it doesn't work as intended. Sometimes it will block, sometimes it won't. Even when I feel as if I hit the exact window to parry, it only works sometimes. I know some people will be commenting saying skill gap or learn the game, but look, I've played other games with parry systems, and Spider-Man 2's is one of the worst for a high-valued game. From reports I've read online, there seems to be a split between an inconsistent parry window or an inconsistent Spidey sense. I've still yet to figure out which one it is. There are a lot of games that benefit from parry systems, but Spider-Man is not one of them. I would have liked to see a more outside-the-box approach for combat in the next title. I'll be disappointed if we get the same exact system again. While Insomniac expanded the combat system, they also stripped back other features like the RPG elements. While the game itself is not an RPG game, it's nice having some choice on how we play Spider-Man. Insomniac took out features that should have been expanded on. We no longer have suit abilities, which I know are controversial, but I like forcing a player to use different suits if they want different abilities. It helps make each experience unique and put some thought into your decisions. Instead of the suit abilities, we now have suit tech, which are basically stat upgrades for our character. You get more health, more damage, more focus, or faster swing speed. Insomniac could have took this feature out altogether and upgraded our stats as we leveled up without us needing to manually upgrade it. The gadgets are also dumbed down. We now only get 4 different gadgets, none of which help with stealth, by the way. While the gadgets are useful in combat, they weren't the next step I was hoping for. In Spider-Man 2, the 3 skill trees return, but instead of being separated by strategy, they are now separated by character. Peter's tree focuses on upgrading his Iron Spider abilities until you unlock the Venom powers. At that point, you will start upgrading all of the new Venom powers. Miles' abilities are focused on his new Venom powers. The third tree is for both Peter and Miles. These are more basic upgrades that help with the overall experience. For me, the abilities lacked imagination. For a sequel as big as this, I hope for more expansion on the abilities and character customization. While I don't think the ability trees or gadgets are bad, they don't push forward the franchise in any meaningful way. I don't find any of the upgrades to be a massive improvement over the first game, which is what I expected from Insomniac. Unfortunately, this goes over to the suits in the game as well. We get 2 characters, which should mean twice the number of suits. Miles gets 33 suits, while Peter gets 34 suits. So they got just about an even amount. In Spider-Man 2, they also added in different colorways for the suits. So one suit can have 4 different colors to choose from. Because of that, there are over 100 different suits we can technically wear. And don't get me wrong, some of the recolors are really cool. But I still found myself sticking to a few different suits throughout the game. I like the idea of Insomniac creating new suits specifically for the games. It's similar to what they do in any movie. They take the basic suit and edit it to make their own unique spin. That's what the advanced suits and Miles' upgraded suits are. While I do appreciate the effort put into the new suits, I didn't enjoy the new suits as much. I found myself gravitating toward the comic book suits. Unfortunately, there is not a large selection of those suits. If my math is correct, Peter had 20 out of 38 suits from the first game come from the comics. In this game, only 12 out of 34 suits came from the comics. They have 8 suits from the MCU alone from my count. That's a downgrade if I've ever seen one. Now look, I understand why all the movie suits are in the game. The movies are popular, I've watched them plenty of times too. But the lack of comic book suits is disappointing. I mean, at least put back in some of the comic book suits from the first game since you already have those created. But there are so many comic book suits that haven't been used. Instead of wasting resources on new suits people may not care about, why not create the suits you already know people care about? And I'm talking about the number of suits from Peter because Miles has only been around for a little bit over 10 years, whereas Peter has been out since 1962. I guess that's why I'm more disappointed with Peter's selection of suits than I am with Miles. I expect a lot more variety for Peter since he has so many years of history and suits. And somehow, I still have trouble finding a Peter suit to wear that I like. Whereas Miles, I have a few suits that I enjoy wearing. Granted, most of them are still comic book suits like Miles Morales 2099, which is my favorite. It's funny because I know it's hypocritical because I've been talking about how safe Insomniac is with Spider-Man 2, but with the suits, I would have liked them to play it a bit safer. Stick to the comic book suits you know people enjoy. Unfortunately, we end up with a half-baked product. But let's be honest, there's one part of the game above all else that makes or breaks it, and that's the story. A compelling story can mask any missteps a game has. With that being said, I'm going to give a synopsis of the story and talk about the good and the bad. So, massive spoiler warning if you didn't already know. Spider-Man 2 picks up 10 months after the events of Spider-Man Miles Morales. The first cutscene is a flashback of Norman putting Harry into a tank with the symbiote. It's a simple cutscene to help any player who didn't play the first game. We then switch to Peter, who is starting as a physics teacher at the school which Miles attends. He's quickly fired for skipping class when Sandman attacks the city. It's a theme in this game, but every time one of the main characters are trying to get something done outside of being Spider-Man, you can assume they will get interrupted. It's annoying that the characters can't even take a step outside the mask without getting interrupted. We then get a cutscene of Kraven that shows us he has come to New York for a great hunt. People who are unaware of Kraven have gotten confused on his reasoning for coming to New York. Kraven knew he was dying, so his goal was to end with one last hunt. He chose a destination with formidable foes from his point of view. Now I'm going to break down the characters individually because I do have some problems with how the characters portrayed, but I'll talk about that later on. Peter then returns to Aunt May's house where he is living and complains again about how he will make money. Then Harry shows up miraculously healed from his terminal illness. Harry then offers Peter a job working at the EMF Foundation. We then play a throwback mission of Harry and Peter sneaking into the high school. It's a mission to try and set up Harry and Peter's friendship on screen since we haven't gotten any time on screen up until this point. I found it a bit unnecessary for me to spend 20 minutes riding a bike and sneaking around the school. Pacing is always important when telling a story. And for me, the pacing is interrupted by spending a third of my first hour in a flashback. Not only do we know they are close, but there are also other ways to show that without needing to waste so much time. Once we return to present time, Peter and Miles oversee a transfer of Lee and Scorpion when Kraven intercepts the prisoner and later kills Scorpion. One thing I didn't like is not showing the deaths of other popular villains. There are no cutscenes showing Electro, Shocker, and Vulture dying. It's shocking that the only way to find out about these deaths is through other missions or clues in the game. For Electro, for instance, you must hear a recording of Kraven calling him a waste of time. I would have rather spent 10 minutes seeing Kraven hunting them rather than 20 minutes riding a bike and roaming a school. After a quick mission with Miles in which he helps Black Cat escape to Paris, we then get a mission at the amusement park with Peter, Harry, and MJ. Kraven's hunters then show up to capture Tombstone. While Peter is helping civilians, Harry shows up to help with his new powers. Peter then tells Harry about his double life as they try and figure out what the exosuit is made of. Peter and Harry then rescue Tombstone from Kraven's men, showing us the first of Venom's powers in this game. At this point, the story is a bit cluttered, juggling both Kraven and the relationship between Peter and Harry as he becomes Venom, while also trying to explore Miles and Peter outside of the mask. But even with the clutter, the story was keeping me engaged. The stakes were high as Kraven's hunters were taking down and chasing down anyone in their path. But the next mission is where the game went downhill for me. We're not only forced to play as MJ, which I talked about earlier, but she somehow turns into John Wick. She was in Symkaria for like 2 weeks and comes back being able to take out Kraven's hunters, some of the deadliest people on the planet. Up until this point, I'm thinking, wow, the hunters really are strong. They're taking out these supervillains, kidnapping them like they're nothing. But then all of a sudden, they get dominated by a girl with a stun gun? For me, they can no longer be taken seriously when fighting against Peter or Miles, and the only reason the fights are close in my mind is for plot armor. Peter is then almost killed by Kraven and is saved by the symbiote attaching to him. At this point, the game is already towards the middle to end, and I felt no accomplishment so far. It's almost a bunch of filler getting to set up Kraven and Venom. I've been waiting for some twists or turns, but it's as straightforward as it could get. Peter and Harry's relationship starts to fracture as Peter continually gets angrier with the corruption from the symbiote. When Miles gets captured and forced to fight Martin Lee to the death, we got the best story portion in the whole game. Miles is able to overcome his anger and forgive Lee, helping him escape to find Peter. Peter then comes to rescue Miles, nearly killing Kraven before Miles steps in and stops it. Miles and Peter then brawl it out, convincing Peter to remove the symbiote. Peter then takes the symbiote to Oscorp to be destroyed when Harry shows up, reclaiming the symbiote and becoming Venom. I liked that we are able to play through the eyes of Venom in this mission and not only witness the destruction through a cutscene, jumping around Oscorp, destroying everyone in our path, and then finishing it off with a boss battle with Kraven is a highlight of the story. With Kraven and Venom being in the story, I expected it to be more gruesome and dark like this part of it was. It's definitely the most brutal part of the story as Kraven and Venom battle it out, with Venom finishing it off by biting Kraven's head off. With Kraven now gone, Peter and Miles attempt to stop the symbiote invasion. Peter and Miles play decoys, allowing MJ to sneak in and destroy the meteorite. Once again, crushing all immersion I had into the story. We have Peter and Miles fighting Venom and the symbiote spawns just for MJ to be right there alongside us with their little stun gun. At this point, they destroy the symbiote, leaving Harry comatose. In the end, Norman is mad, setting up a probable Green Goblin in the third game. Peter then retires as Spidey to spend more time on being Peter. In the last scene, Miles' mom, Rio, then brings her new boyfriend and his daughter to meet Miles, setting up Cindy Moon as Silk for future installments. Overall, when I compare Spider-Man 2 to Spider-Man 2018, I'm not as satisfied with the ending to Spider-Man 2. The pacing is off, especially the third act, where they really should have dialed in the story more. They sped it up, which left it making no sense. And then when the story was over, I honestly had to ask myself, what gets done? I like having those feelings of either happiness or sadness when you finish a story. But Harry is back to being comatose. Miles is basically doing the same thing with his mom. The only real difference is Peter retiring as Spider-Man, which we know won't last anyways. Having a story with both Peter and Miles, I expected more, but it felt awkward. And the pacing was worse in the first game. Spider-Man 2's story is so straightforward, it lacks the emotional elements and intrigue that the first game had. Maybe it's just me, but I prefer the more mysterious approach the first game had. Martin Li's story had a lot more intrigue as we uncovered the plan. In this game, they show us a cutscene of Kraven wanting to hunt everyone and have us fight that story for half the game. I felt as if the game was more of a setup for the third installment. I talked about it a little earlier with the number of stories they left open, like Carnage and Cindy Moon. Even Wong left Miles a note saying they owe him one. I will say, I do like Miles' story in this game, especially the part with Martin Li and his redemption. I will give them credit for writing that story. Miles for me is the character who made the biggest jump in this game. It's hard for Miles in media right now because he has to be compared to the Spider-Verse movies, which are doing a great job on his character arc. In the Insomniac trilogy, they have chosen a safer approach to Miles. In his own game, he is still finding his way to be Spider-Man and discovered he can be on his own. Spider-Man 2, Miles is able to mature past his hatred for Martin Li for the greater good of New York, which for a high school student is a huge accomplishment. Miles is also the one who is able to get through to Peter when Peter is affected by the symbiote, bringing Peter back to realization. Miles also goes toe-to-toe with Venom without Peter's help. These are all improvements for Miles, who was having problems with the Tinkerer just a while ago. Problem is, by lifting up Miles, they have pushed down Peter. They show Miles as being strong and competent while Peter is getting slammed by almost everyone. I get that Peter is dealing with other things outside of being Spider-Man, but in the 2018 game, Peter takes out the Sinister Six by himself with injuries. Yes, I know he didn't fight them all six at once, but still. And he was still dealing with other things outside of being Spider-Man. In this game, Peter needs Miles or Harry's help for just about everything. I know Peter is taking on more of a mentorship role to Miles in this game, but Peter is only 25 years old. By no means is he old or washed up, and he has way more experience doing it for a decade. Not even with pure power, but with wisdom, Peter should be stronger than we are shown. Even against Yuri or Wraith, whatever you want to call her, Peter loses the upper hand, and I don't care how much he's holding back, that shouldn't be the case. In the last fight with Venom, Peter is wearing the anti-venom suit and still gets knocked out, leaving Miles to fight Venom alone. Peter can hold his own without the symbiote. With it, he should be levels above, and with the anti-venom, even crazier above. But at least make him competent at the minimum. Now maybe they nerfed Peter in this game to show a higher level of strength in the third installment. Unfortunately, we won't know until the third game comes out. Maybe Peter does need time off to be a stronger version of himself. But if I was a betting man, I wouldn't gamble on it. I will say I did appreciate Harry and Peter's friendship in this game. Harry was a good friend throughout most of the game until he got fully engulfed in the Venom symbiote, and even then, he still turns for good. Harry as an ally is a fun addition to Peter, but as Venom, it didn't work the way I hoped. When I think of Peter's best friend being a villain, I expect it to be more emotional than it was. I never saw the true hate for Peter that Venom usually has. I would have liked for them to explore more of the hate Venom, because being rejected by Peter makes Venom who he is. Venom's story was more about world domination, which when you have Harry become Venom doesn't make the most sense. The logic was Harry wanted to cure the world and this is Venom's way of curing the world, which felt illogical at times. The only time Venom felt as vicious as I would expect is the fight against Kraven. I wanted Venom to be that way, but for the whole game. I know this game is meant for kids and adults alike, but some of Spidey's storylines are not as happy as others. If they want to keep a happier theme, then don't use the more vicious storylines. Unfortunately, I feel similar about the Kraven storyline as well. Not as much about Kraven's story or reasoning, but how Kraven handles the situations. I get the twist of Kraven being terminally ill and wanting a strong opponent for his death. But Kraven the Hunter doesn't do any hunting. All the minions do the hunting. If you speak about wanting glory and being worthy and all the honor, why let your minions ambush the enemies every time? Finally, once he does kidnap the prey, he fights them on his own turf. If he wants to prove his strength and worth, shouldn't it be on even fighting grounds? And why are you going after Black Cat? I like Black Cat as a character, don't get me wrong. But really? Out of everyone you want to go after, Black Cat's on your list? Is it just a warm-up? Until Peter got the symbiote, Peter wasn't even in the cards, and Peter's defeated all of these people. Instead of a game showing us that we really need to fear Kraven, we are told to fear Kraven, which ends up feeling forced. That's a theme in this game if you haven't noticed already. Forcing characters into situations or ideas that don't make a lot of sense. The leader of that for me, no other than MJ. The character feels so forced to be involved. They need a reason for her to be as strong, so let's throw a half-baked reason in there so she can fight alongside Peter and Miles. Honestly, she's more competent than both of them. Her stun gun can take out these enemies in 1 or 2 hits. Miles and Peter's abilities can't do that. Having her be the ace journalist behind the scenes and even getting into trouble trying to do too much while gathering information are plot points I can get behind. I don't mind her as a character, but as soon as you make her this overpowered superhero, I no longer have interest. Forcing her to be another character that takes out enemies takes away from the story she could offer. Let MJ develop a story outside of being a superhero. Even in a universe with superheroes, these character arcs are still needed. So it's time to answer the question we've been asking from the start. Does Spider-Man 2 live up to the hype? Well, sadly for me, it doesn't live up to the hype. Is it a horrible game? No. I enjoy the game. But when I compare it to the 2018 Spider-Man, I see digression in almost every category. Spider-Man 2 was destined to be one of the best games of all time, building off of the first title and pushing the boundaries of what the standard of gaming is. But the gameplay ends up being similar. Every new feature is safely put in, trying to make sure to not mess anything up. And sometimes that works. But with a story that leaves some to be desired, I finished the game still looking for more. If you do enjoy the content, make sure to drop a like and subscribe for more content like this. And as always, I will see you guys next time.